Okay, now we're recording.
Okay, so hello and welcome to our kitchens. I'm Elaine, for those of you that don't know, and over there on the other screen is Angela.
Hi everyone, I'm Angela. I'm located in central New Jersey, the United States. I'll be teaching the tomato sauce portion of the class today. Elaine, do you want to tell all our friends who maybe found this class through my media where you're located, if they can't already tell?
Yeah, and then I'll tell you guys a bit about me. I'll ask Angela to tell herself a bit about herself for everybody that doesn't know, because you don't all know us. So apparently I have a very English accent. So I am right in the middle of the UK. I'm in a little village, right in the middle, most landlocked place you can be in the UK. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm the sourdough person. I am apparently my title is food writer and broadcaster. I've just written my third sourdough book. I also have a podcast, hence the broadcasting bit. But the key thing on everything I do is about simplifying sourdough, making it as simple as possible, as accessible as possible. So forget any of the complicated stuff, the unnecessary steps, the scientific over-the-top stuff. You won't get that with me. It's about simplifying it and making it easy for every day. So that's what the aim of the recipe is today that I'll be showing you, is keeping it as simple as possible. So that's me for the people that don't know me. So Angela from my guys.
So I'm Angela. I have a small 6-acre homestead, or what some might call an allotment, in central New Jersey. I believe in taking all facets of my farm, from the plants and the animals, and creating a working ecosystem. So all of the plants and the animals that are here work together to create a more environmentally friendly farm setup, food that's more nutritious, and we're giving more back to the soil than what we're taking. Today, I'll be teaching homemade tomato sauce from tomatoes that are either grown fresh in your backyard. Perhaps you purchased them from a farmer's market or a community-supported agriculture program. But the point is, same as Elaine, I try to make things more approachable and accessible. Canning can be scary. There's a lot of people who may not have any experience, but it absolutely doesn't have to be. We're going to talk about botulism. You're not going to die. You're not going to get food poisoning. It's going to be fabulous. And I'm so grateful and so happy that everyone is here today to join us.
I can't wait. I have to say, for those of you that don't know Angela, you have to follow her account. I didn't know anything about homesteading. Here, I think we would call it a small holding, because it's a small farm that you've got. But Angela has gone from being a city girl to now doing this and doing everything for herself. And when you see, like recently you put your ducklings up, or when you see you with your horses, I mean, it inspires me. I haven't got that far yet, but there's nothing that you do that doesn't look amazing, and you do it so easily.
Well, that's kind. Thank you. Oh, Elaine and I we've been friends since well before COVID, because I remember during COVID, Elaine, you were on a walk with your dog and we were talking about how you'd given yourself a haircut and we're so impressed with your skills.
Yeah.
But I found Elaine also on Instagram, and I had a lot of issues with making sourdough loaves that were way too complicated. We were talking about hydration, and I had no idea what that meant as someone new to sourdough. And so it was Elaine's recipes that actually kind of got me through that wall where I was just making loaves that were like bricks. And so if you're interested in making sourdough, honestly, it isn't scary. And Elaine teaches you how to work with your environment, because everybody's humidity is different. Everybody's kitchens are different. And so she really takes the time to answer questions one-on-one. So if you're unfamiliar with Elaine, make sure you check out her account.
Thank you. We could happily spend this whole next hour or so just applauding each other. However, that's not what you're here to do. So what we're going to do is Angela is going to have some time to herself whilst I come on your screen, this main screen. So I'm going to show you my recipe and show you how I make my pizza rolls. We'll see you soon. what my aim to do is to show you initially a demonstration and then invite you to join in. If you've got a couple of doughs, feel free if you want to do both of them. So this recipe comes from my latest book. So this is my latest book, Easy Everyday Sourdough Bread Baking. And the whole ethos of this book, the aim was that I wanted to be able to show how easy it is to make sourdough on a daily basis, to be able to have doughs that you can easily handle and manage, but also to use the things that we have in our homes on a regular basis. So hence why this uses a muffin pan. So by using a muffin pan, we're giving that pan another use, but also if you're worried about the shape or how they're coming together, you can just stuff it in the wells of the muffin tin and it's going to come out perfectly. So that was the aim of my book, was to make sure we have lots of uses for all of our pans. So these are the pans that I use on a regular basis for baking my loaves in. But what you'll find in the book is another way of using them for making rolls and all sorts. So as an idea, what I've done with another dough today, which would be another way that you could use these pizza rolls that we're making, is this. This is another dough that I rolled and filled with whatever I could find in my cupboard. So this has got chocolate, dates and walnuts in, but it could also have been your pizza rolls. So it's a way of making snug rolls, but again, not needing to worry about the shaping. So if you take anything away from what we do today, it would be try using the pans that you've got in your kitchen to do something different. Don't worry about the shaping. Especially in this book, all the recipes have been designed for you not to worry about it. So one of the reasons that when I sent out the details about for making this dough was I asked you all to keep it in the fridge, is because then as well, you've got a really easy dough to work with because the dough is going to be really firm. So when you're making most of the recipes in my book that need shaping, a really big tip for you to make it really simple is when your dough is fully proved, shove it in the fridge. Once it's been in the fridge for a while, it's then going to firm up and be really easy to handle, especially when you are using like the enriched dough, because that makes it really firm and you can almost roll it out like pastry. So that's why I asked you to keep them in the fridge, and that's where mine are now. So I'm going to get my first one out. And the intention with this is to stretch out the dough, fill it, roll it, chop it, stuff it in a muffin pan. So I'm going to do one. If you want to join in with a couple, feel free. Of course, here's some I made earlier because I made extra doughs just to so that I could show you. I can tell you that they smell really good. So let me get my dough out. With this one, I'm going to stick it in the oven so that you can see what they look like later. Right. So something else that you'll discover about me, if you don't already know, is I never preheat the oven. So I've just put them in a cold oven, then turned up the temperature and added the time. So you don't need to time it from the point that the oven gets to temperature. You just do it, put it in, put the time on. So as soon as it's gone in, that's when your timing begins. And I'll do the same with making the pizza rolls. So I have 2 ovens, so I can do this. If you don't, it doesn't matter if you do the first one from cold, second one from preheated. It's only about 5 minutes difference. So here is my dough that I made last night. So I do actually do this, I don't pretend. When I take off my shower caps, I put them over the tops of the sticks that are sticking out of my orchids for them to dry so that they can be used later. So this dough, I proved it overnight using my standard process, and I've had it in the fridge ever since. So for me, it's 3 o'clock in the UK. So this has been in the fridge since about 6 o'clock this morning. So If you have got any questions as we go along, please do send them. We will do a set at the end. We will answer some questions for you rather than me trying to do it as I go along. So if you are asking questions, Shana might be able to answer for you, or will answer some for you later. So what I'm going to do is put some flour on the surface, and I tend to use rice flour for that, but you can also use your standard bread flour if you want to. I've got my muffin tin available. Mine is non-stick, standard muffin pan. And I've got a dough knife that I'm going to use to chop up my dough. Now, these are really good because it's a non-stick scraper, like basically, they call them a dough knife, but it's really easy for chopping them up. But if you don't have one of them, you can very easily just use a sharp knife. So I'm going to liberally throw some flour on the surface and just ease this dough. So all I did when it was fully proved this morning, I haven't touched it, I didn't do anything with it. I just stuck it straight in the fridge as it was, still with its shower cap on, and that's all that's happened. So it's been in the fridge all that time, and all we want is a nice plop of dough on the counter. So don't worry about squashing it, squeezing it or anything. That's what we're going to do. We're going to push it out. So my theory is always with dough, if you have made a strong enough dough, doesn't matter what you do to it. You could sit on it, you could roll a car over it, it's still going to come back to play. So don't worry about this idea or this fear of pushing the bubbles out of it or pushing the life out of it. So I can feel under my fingers that this is cold from being in the fridge, which is fine. And it will take some time to then push it out. Now you could do this a bit more accurately if you want to. In the book, I've included measurements to push it out to. It's my requirement as the recipe writer and the book writer to provide you with measurements. So you could do this out to the measurements that I've given, or you can just push it out like I am until you feel that you're happy with it. And the key here is not to end up with holes. So try and push and pull as much as possible. Apologies, I don't have an overhead camera going on here, but it was ending up being too much like hard work. But you can see close-ups of me doing things like this on other videos. So we're just going to keep on pushing it. Now, as is the way with dough, it wants to bounce back. So it's going to keep on trying to bounce back. So just keep on easing it out and just push it all towards each other so that you don't end up with anything that's too uneven in thickness. You don't end up with any holes in it. Get it to a point that you feel comfortable with it. I'm just going to let it sit briefly. When you've got longer than me, you can let it sit briefly so that it relaxes and you can push it out a bit more. So, Angela, don't look. I've got a shop bought pizza sauce. I will be making my own after I've watched Angela's Zoom in a second. I've got different versions of cheese. So when it comes to the cheese that you use, so we've got 150 grams of the pizza sauce, we've got 200 grams of cheese, and you can have either just standard single cheese. So this one is just a cheddar. This one is a mix of cheddar and mozzarella. This one is a mix of cheddar and a cheese that we get here in the UK. It's so nice. It's got it's like a red Leicester with Mexican spices in it. That's so good. So the cheese can be whatever you've got, whatever you might have in the cupboard, in the fridge even. You can go, so this is the basic one. I'm just going to do the sauce with the cheese. Then on the next one, I might add some other bits. So you can add in some slices of chorizo. You can add in some jalapenos. I've got some chili flakes that I might put on some, because my husband likes something that's got a little bit of heat in it. So even though this isn't too even, don't worry about it. So I'm just going to spread the pizza sauce all across the surface. What you'll notice if you made this dough, my standard dough has 350 grams of water. This one I use 325 grams of water, again, to give you a stiffer dough that will be easier to work with. So it's going to spread the sauce across the surface. So one thing to keep in mind when you do these is really go to the edges as much as possible, because otherwise you always end up with a roll or two that's really just a bit of bread at the end, which of course none of us mind because we like sourdough, but it's nice if you can try and get something across all of it. So I'm going to use this one, which is the mix of mozzarella and cheddar. So go right to the edges to the extent that you're going to end up with some on the table, to make sure you get to all the edge pieces. Just as evenly as possible so that everybody gets a bit. So I'm going to keep this one just as the basic one. And then on the next dough, we'll add some more into it. So whether you do it just like this or you want to go from the side, all we want to do is roll it. So just start from one end and roll it as tightly as you can. So just tucking it in as I go, so that you end up with a really nice tight sausage. So this is really good fun. This is good fun to do if you're doing it with kids. If you've got children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, it's good fun to do because it's a hands-on thing. And I tend to get to the end and then tuck over and wrap across the final bit. So don't worry about how neat or not this is at this point, because you're about to chop the whole thing up. So like I said, you could measure it. So you could do it more precisely if you want to. You can have a tape measure going down the side, or you can do it like I'm just about to do and do it by eye. So you may end up with some that are all different sizes, but you know, then it's all part of the fun, isn't it? Who picks up the bigger ones? So it's going to go down the middle, half again, and then each piece into three. So there's always more filling in the middle bits, even though we've tried to go to the edges. And then all we're going to do is put them into the wells in your muffin pan. So this is where, if things start to fall apart, really don't worry about it, because the muffin pan is going to create the shape for you. So you can stuff it all in, do whatever you like, and it's still going to work. So one of the beauties of this is we can now bake this immediately. You don't need to wait for it to prove again. You just get it straight in the oven. And another beauty of it is you can eat them immediately. Not like a loaf where you need to wait, really, ideally. You can eat them straight off. But what you could also do is you could do this part. You can have them all in your pan ready to go. And then you could cover it over, big plastic bag, or just cover it over to put into your fridge. Let it prove in there for as long as you like, as long as you need to, and then bake it direct from the fridge. So if you wanted to have them ready for some time later, you could bake them then. So here we go, there's my first set. So I'm going to do it again. If you're joining in, join in now. And I'm just going to scrape this down. Let's get on and roll some dough together. Excuse me. So in the next one, I'm going to add in some extras just to show you an alternative. So if you are going to add in some extras, just keep them thin so that you're not bulking it out too much. But again, you know, as I said, don't worry about if they end up misshapen or they're bulky. It's not an issue because the muffin tin is going to hold it and do the shaping for you. Right. Going to go again. So to show you something different whilst you're doing yours, just to show you an alternative, this dough I made slightly differently. So shower cap so that it dries off. And this dough is half whole wheat or wholemeal and half plain flour. So what you all-purpose flour, or often I do it with white spelt flour. So this goes to show that you can do it with whatever flour mix you want. And oh, this dough is beautiful. As it's come out, you can hear the texture. So I hope you're doing this with me. It's very cool to think that there's people in their kitchens at the same time doing this along with me. So this is really stiff because of the whole wheat in this. This is a much stiffer dough, which makes it even easier to work with. So you're just pushing and pulling. Just think about the work that's doing on your arms. So we're just going to push and pull it and fill it again. The beauty of this with the whole wheat in it is you can really feel the texture from the grains, the milling. You can really feel the texture in the flour. Oh, it's a joy. And sometimes as you do this, you can actually get the bubbles coming up. So ideally, you want it to be more of a rectangle so that it's a bit longer than it's wider for when you're rolling it. She says, as it ends up being a bit of a square. Okay. And I've just got some more of the same sauce again. But if you don't have sauce, something that I do sometimes, and actually something my son requests, is using ketchup. You could always put ketchup across it as your sauce. I once posted a loaf that was cheese and ketchup babka, and there was uproar. I got all sorts of abuse online for putting ketchup in my sourdough. How could I abuse my sourdough with ketchup? In the end, it's all about personal taste. And if my son would then eat the rolls, I would put whatever he likes in it personally. Right, so here we go. It's a nice, even thickness going on. That. So I'm going to, I hope you're all with me. Give me a virtual thumbs up. There we go. So I've got more of the same sauce. So my sauce is going to go on. Of course, you wouldn't need to necessarily do pizza sauce. I know for a fact that one of our bakers that's baking along is using pesto. So there's lots of different options that you could use. And in my book, I've got quite a few recipes that are done in a muffin pan like this. So one of them is cheese and marmite, very British, but very nice. And I need to make some of them for the very lovely Emily for next week. You can just fill it with anything. Something else that works really nicely, actually, is if you've got roasted sweet potato. It's brilliant. If you whole roast sweet potatoes and then scrape out the flesh, you can use it like a puree. You can spread it like a puree, and it makes a really nice filling. And you can add different things to that. So any sauce you fancy really can go on there. You know, this is the whole point. The fact is, once you've got the basics down of doing this, you can throw in whatever you like. It's just a case of rolling it up, sticking it in your muffin pan, and you know, you've got whatever you like. So for this one, for my boy, I'm going to put some chorizo. Yes, I'm vegetarian, but my husband and son are not. And they very much like chorizo or pepperoni going on, and it doesn't bother me to be throwing in whatever meat they fancy. So I'm going to put, what you could do as well is you don't have to cover the whole thing with everything. So I haven't got enough pieces of chorizo out, so the end bit isn't going to have a bit of chorizo on it. I'm going to throw some jalapenos on there as well. Who doesn't like jalapeno and cheese? So this is going to be a bit of a half and half. So it can have whatever bits you want. You don't have to cover the whole thing with everything. Okay. For this one, I'm just going to use the standard cheese because we've got a lot of flavour going on from the other things. And again, get it right to the edges. So the flowers I'm using are all Cotswold flowers. They're the flowers I use in my home. But you can use whatever flowers work for you that you know work in your dough. For me, I just use my tap water because that's what works. That's what works. I've used my standard beautiful starter. But you can do this with a yeasted dough. It doesn't have to be sourdough. Any dough. You can just do any dough. So again, we're going to start rolling it up. This is such a nice dough to be doing this with. It's really easy to handle. I'm just tucking it in and rolling. Are you with me? I hope you're with me. Just going to keep rolling. Here we go. Nice, big, fat sausage. Look at that. Look at that. Full of fabulousness. How fabulous does that look? Of course, once you've got to this point, and you've got it in your great big lovely sausage like this, what you could do is you could then be cutting it in half and patting it to turn it into a babka. And what you could do is put it in the fridge like this and chop it up later. If you felt it was a bit sloppy and you were worried about handling it and then managing it, you could put it in the freezer briefly and firm it up and then do what you need to do with it. And again, just bake it from cold. Everything can be baked from cold. It doesn't need to be proved again. Or like I said, it can be in your muffin pan, in the fridge, then you can bake it fresh and ready. If you've got guests or dinner plans, you can just have them straight out. Now, when I was testing these things from my book, I've had these in the fridge for a day. The ones that I put in the oven earlier in the pan, I've had them sitting in the fridge for 24 hours. So don't worry about the time that you leave it in there. If you want to get ahead, like at Christmas time and stuff like that, if you want to get ahead, it's all doable. So you don't have to have this as something that needs to be done right there and then. So if you feel it's a bit fat, you can just give it a squish. Do what you like with it, really. I think, you know, you could also think about, if you made it thinner, you could just roll it up into a snake and put it in your pan and bake it like that, and then be cutting into it, you know, almost like you would do with like a spanakopita or something. And there's just so much you can do with it. It's just endlessly usable, basically. So I'm going to cut it in half again. Again, I'm just doing it by eye. And the beauty of this is it's just going to go straight through the meats and everything else that's in there. It's 3 again. And when I put this in the oven, I'm going to put the oven on to 200 degrees centigrade. And it's going to be in there from a cold start, 30 minutes. So let's just put them in the wells again. Look at that. Can you see? Look at that. I'm quite proud of that. And again, so we're just stuffing them all into the wells. And believe me, I've done this with much sloppier dough. And again, still, I've just stuffed it in and it works. I'm a very big believer in just, you know, shoving things in there. See what you get at the end of the day, because however it looks, believe me, it's going to taste amazing. So this is a bit falling apart, this piece, because it's packed full of stuff in the middle. And then it goes into your muffin well and ends up perfectly shaped. You could, if you wanted to, put paper liners in them, but when I've tried that, the liners do stick. And you could use little fluted, like brioche tins. They can work as well if you wanted to make something a bit prettier. Now this has ended up as a really fat one. This is a bit thick. And at the end, I haven't got much filling left in it. So I'm going to just slice the bottom piece off, make it a little bit thinner, and I'll cook that piece on its own. So there we go. Again, tray full of fabulousness. I'm going to put these in the oven, start the timer as soon as they go in. Excuse me. Those of you that know me know that I'm not a big lover of having dirty hands. So they're going to go in the oven. The oven is not on. It's not on yet. It's going to go in the oven. I'm going to turn it up to temperature, and then it will be on for half an hour. If you get them out and you feel that they need longer, of course you can put them back in. So there we go. Oven is on, up to 200. Timer is on for half an hour. And now is the perfect opportunity for us to be able to see what Angela's doing, and Angela to teach us how she makes her brilliant tomato sauce whilst these are baking. Angela, are you back with us?
I'm here.
Hey, hey! Right. I'm going to say goodbye, and I'm going to watch you whilst I tidy up.
Okay.
And we'll chat afterwards. Did I do okay?
It was wonderful. It was excellent. Good job.
Right. See you soon.
Okay.
Bye.
All right. So let's talk about making tomato sauce from fresh tomatoes. So here's the thing about canning. Canning is a science. This is not a time to get creative in the kitchen. We hear horror stories about botulism, cans exploding, all this anaerobic activity and bacteria that takes place in the jar. That's because a recipe was not followed to a T. So canning recipes have been tested and scientifically proven to be storage safe. We have to take into consideration the pH level. We're talking about acid. And so when we start to do things like add other ingredients, add spices, and try to flavor it before we water bath can it, that's when we start to run into issues. So this is a water bath canning safe recipe. If you follow it to a T, you will not have a problem. Water bath canning is heating up. I have a second camera over here, so you should be able to see that if you want a close-up on my stovetop. A water bath can recipe is simply the process of boiling a product in a canning safe jar in hot water. And we heat it up for a certain period of time that it's going to kill bacteria, but not everything is water bath can safe. So things like meat, pumpkin, squash, soups, you'll actually need to pressure can those, and that's an entirely different process. Today we're focusing on water bath canning in pint-sized jars. So if this recipe doesn't suit you, that's okay. You can go find something else. Just make sure it's tried and true and scientifically tested so that you don't get sick. All right, that little disclaimer out of the way. In front of me here, I have slicing tomatoes. Here in central New Jersey, in the United States, we are just coming upon tomato season. So I do not have tomatoes fresh in my garden at this moment. I bought these from a local farmer's market where they have hothouse or greenhouse tomatoes. You can use any tomato that you like for your sauce. You can absolutely just stick with paste tomatoes, things like Roma, San Marzano. The reason people really like paste tomato varieties is because they have a meatier flesh and a little bit less water content. So what you end up with is a thicker sauce. You don't have to simmer for as long. I use anything and everything. I use cherries because I think they make a sweeter sauce. I combine it with slicer tomatoes, paste tomatoes, and I kind of create this big amalgamation of whatever happens to be coming out of my garden. If you're only growing a few tomato plants at a time, and you think it's going to take a while to accumulate enough tomatoes to create a sauce, I think I said we needed 24 pounds, or whatever the other conversion was. The measurement is in the recipe that we sent out. You can just keep them in the freezer, in a freezer-safe bag or container until you've accumulated enough. What you will then do is thaw them out in a dish on your counter or stovetop rather than slicing from a fresh state. So we'll touch on that again in a second. Let's go ahead and jump back to using fresh tomatoes. So these are freshly washed, and I've inspected them to make sure that they are blemish-free. If you have anything diseased, any blight, you're going to want to either cut deep to remove as much flesh around the infected area as possible. That's not something that we're going to want to can. We don't want to can worms accidentally. So try to use a blemish-free, bruise-free tomato and save the other ones for fresh eating, where you can properly extract what you need to. These, again, are just red slicing tomatoes. I've cut an X in the bottom. We're not going super deep. What we're trying to do is simply create a score like you would for your bread, so that when we heat this up, the skin is going to peel away. On the other side, I have cored the tomato. I'm going to head over to my second camera here so that you can see a close-up. I simply take my knife and I'm cutting at a diagonal to remove a cone shape that contains the core. That way we retain as much of the meat of the tomato as possible. I'm going to save this for the compost heap, set that aside in a bowl, turn that over, and just score an X. These tomatoes, after they're cored and scored, are going to go in a baking dish, top side or core side down. That exposes the X and allows for it to peel away more easily. So this morning, I already scored and cored several. You can see here, I've got a bowl full of all of the stems and cores, what I've already done. And I placed them in my roasting pan at 350 degrees for about 20 to 30 minutes. We're looking for them to have a wrinkly skin, as you can see in the second camera that's over here. This shows us that they are ready to be peeled. You can see how easily the skin pulls away, leaving the soft flesh of the tomato. What you can do with these skins, don't toss them out. Either use them in your compost Or you can save them and put them in your dehydrator, crisp them, dry them in the dehydrator, and use a blender or a coffee grinder to grind them up into a fine powder. You can use tomato powder in your soups, your stews, as a bread flavoring. So that tends to come in handy for different recipes all throughout the year. And it's just a good zero waste way to use every single part of the tomato. Okay, so after I've roasted and peeled my tomato skins after they've cooled so that we don't burn our fingers, I've thrown them into a stock pot. The other thing you can do is put them in a crock pot. If you put them in a crock pot, set them on the lowest setting to simmer for about 8 or 9 hours. So often I will get to this phase the evening before I plan to can. That way, all of the hard work of coring and peeling, roasting is finished. It's going to simmer overnight while I. If you had these taken from the freezer, honestly, what ends up happening is when you remove them, allow them to thaw, you're going to find that the skin is ready to peel on its own. So go ahead and peel that cold skin off, and again, save it the same way. Pour it at that point, cut the X, and if you find any that's not peeling, that X, put that in the fridge. That X is going to help to peel that skin, if that makes sense. And then you would go through the same process of removing, peeling any additional tomatoes that now have the skin nice and loose, and then you would put that into your stock pot or into your crock pot. I had this boiling on the stove at a high boil this morning. You would let this go on low. I'm trying to speed this up for the sake of this class today. What I'm trying to do is evaporate as much water as possible. That's going to create a thicker sauce, especially since I use any and all tomatoes. That's why we want to cook it on low for such a long period of time. Traditionally speaking, you want to get rid of a lot of that water. So I think you can see me okay here in the second camera. Now that this has been cooking for quite some time, I'm going to go ahead and blend this. And then we're going to talk about sterilizing our jars so we can move on to canning. This is an immersion blender I'm going to use. You could also place this in a stand-up blender and blend right on your countertop. And we're just looking to remove the lumps and thin out the sauce. This point, I'm going to turn off my stock pot. If you have these in the crock pot, you would go ahead and turn them off now. And they'll stay warm enough over the next few minutes as we heat up our jars. So we need to sterilize our canning jars in order to make this a safe canning process. Absolutely, as we heat the product, while it all cooks together in the water bath pan, it gets additional time in the hot water. But it's very good practice to go ahead and just wash your jars out at least with soap and water to remove any dust and debris. You don't want that ending up in your final sauce product. And then, while Elaine was cooking the bread, I actually had the jars in the boiling water just for a few minutes. And I kept them safe and warm in the oven to maintain their sterility until I was ready to use them. The other reason we need to make sure our jars are hot is because we need somewhat temperature compatibility between the jar and the hot sauce that is about to go into it. If we had a cold jar and we added hot sauce, it's likely to crack. And then you'd have to discard the entire product because you don't want to run the risk of feeding anyone, including yourself, glass. So we have this here. We have our pint jars, or I think the conversion was at a 500 milliliter jar. I'm going to go ahead and add our lemon juice. Per pint, I'm adding 1 tablespoon. Again, find the conversion if you're not in the States. I'm going to add the lemon juice to my jar. I'm then going to funnel my tomato sauce. Now, the reason that we're using bottled lemon juice is because it has a guaranteed proven acidity level. If we used a fresh lemon, we would not know the acidity level of each lemon. It would vary from lemon to lemon. So this is one of the instances where you actually want to go with bottled over fresh. The lemon juice's job is to create a safe pH level. This amount of lemon juice interacts with the acid that is already in the tomato juice from the tomato, and that's going to create shelf stability. That's what makes this safe to store. I know people who skip the lemon juice phase in their jars and their sauce explodes because they don't have the right acidity level. They don't have the pH. Now, if you like to season your sauce, as I do, if you're using this for pasta or pizza sauce, I would do that after I store this. So whenever I'm making that particular dish, that recipe, I'm going to go ahead and season my sauce when I'm cooking everything else. That is the time to add your spices, your sugar, whatever you're using. Right now, we just only want the lemon juice and we want the sauce. I know some people, when they can, they do add salt. If that's something you want to do, to put salt in there, that's not something you need for storage safety. That's a flavoring agent. If that's something you decide to use, make sure that you get a recipe that's actually proven and safely tested for that. Right, I'm just going to finish filling this. And we're going to leave what's called a 1/2 inch of headspace. Again, find the proper conversion in your recipe that was sent. We need that headspace at the top because when we seal this up, it's going to boil, it's going to steam. We want a little bit of room in there. But before I add a lid, and we're going to talk about lids in just a second, grab a knife, or you can purchase specific canning tools. Butter knife is fine. Go around the edge just to remove any air bubbles and make sure that we have as much product per jar as possible. Set this aside. I'm going to grab a cloth. Not too hot, I'll keep this up. And just wipe the top edge to make sure there are no splatters. And this is going to help us to ensure a tight seal. We can reuse jars. We can reuse canning rings. What we use to tighten the lid on, we cannot reuse lids. Every single lid, when you take it out of the box, comes with an adhesive or glue on there. When you use these, even if it's for dry goods and you're not canning it, you start to deteriorate that adhesive, and that is going to be what can decrease the effectiveness of your seal. And then that's, again, where we get issues into bacteria coming in. So I'm going to show you, this is a brand new box, brand new lids. Just take a quick look at your lids. This one here, I would not use for canning. I could use this for dry goods. I could use this to store spices in a spice jar, but I would not want to use that. You see that deterioration of that adhesive? That is, even though it's fresh out of the box, not a good choice for a lid for canning because it can create a weak seal or no seal at all. Rather, I'm going to use the ones that have the full adhesion on the edge. Does that make sense? Okay, so we're going to take this. We are going to apply it. We do not keep that ahead of time. Again, it will deteriorate the adhesive that's on there. So don't wash it. Don't heat it up. Don't wipe it. Don't do anything. Just set it right on the jar. Next, you're going to take your ring. Again, these are reusable because they're on the outside of the product. And we're going to screw this on finger tight. Finger tight just means you tighten it so that if you were to flip the jar upside down, it wouldn't come off. But we're not like looking to really just like make it so that it's impossible to open. That's the job of the water bath canner. Okay, at this point, we have a very hot jar because we put our hot product inside. Again, we've completed the lemon juice. We've added the tomato product. We are going to put this into the stock pot. And I'm not sure if this is going to cover this since I'm only using one jar. So give me 1 second here. We don't want the jar to be on its side. We want the jar to be standing upright. We don't want it to flip upside down. You can absolutely can as many jars as will fit in your pot. The more jars you have, the more that water level is going to rise because we're displacing the water. So remember that if you're sticking, 6, 8 jars in here and you fill your pot, that pot is going to overflow because there has to be a place for that water to go. We're trying to ensure that we have 1 inch or more of water above the jar. And the reason we want that is because it's going to ensure we have enough hot water on the top of the jar that we're actually circulating enough heat around the entire jar from base to lid. This is going to help to ensure a proper seal. Now, if I had all of my jars in here, imagine that they were side to side. Hopefully you can see. Let me see, I'm just going to adjust my camera. There you go. Now you can see that better. Pretend that this is boiling and I didn't just move this off the burner. If all of our jars were in here, we would leave this, and you would probably hear them rattling as they're bouncing and touching together. We would leave this in here to boil for 35 minutes. Not 30, not 40. But if you have to, going over is better than definitely going under. If you have, for some reason, stop your stove because you have to run outside, you're not able to keep an eye on it, come back and restart the whole process later because we need to ensure that it is in the boiling water for 35 minutes. When you take the jar out after the 35 minutes, let's pretend this was boiling for 35 minutes. It's going to begin to cool. You would hear all of the jars begin to pop like that. That is the sound of all of the air. It's being removed, it's vacuumed, and it sucks down the center of this lid. When the jars are safe enough to touch after about 1.5 hours to 2 hours on the countertop after they've been removed, you can use your finger to touch the center of the lid of each and every jar. What you're doing is testing for a seal. The seal should not pop. It should be flat, no way to push it in. If it fluctuates, like this one is doing now, you need to reprocess your jar. You don't have to throw out the entire product. You do need to reprocess for the full 35 minutes in the water bath. And perhaps you only have one. So just like I did now, you're going to fill it up with water enough to the point where it covers the jar with 1 inch or so of water, bring that to a boil, process for 35 minutes. And this is what is going to create a shelf-stable jar of tomato sauce. You're going to store these out of sunlight. Pantry is great, in a cupboard, a cool, dark, dry place, not with a lot of temperature or sunlight extremes, and then just use it like you would any other canned sauce. For folks who are severely concerned about botulism, maybe feeling a little bit paranoid about their first few batches of tomato sauce, just make sure that when you're cooking your sauce, cook it for about 20 to 25 minutes on the stovetop. So if I'm going to make pizza sauce for Elaine's pizza rolls, I would take my sauce jar, crack it open, dump out the contents into a sauce pot, and let that simmer for 20 to 25 minutes. That is absolutely the best way to guarantee that you have no bacterial spores in there whatsoever. Add your seasonings and just move on like you would any other tomato sauce recipe. If you find in your cabinet that for some reason you have a bad smell, discoloration, or exploding jars, you do need to discard your entire batch of tomato sauce. But I do not foresee that happening for you, especially if you're following the recipe step by step, making sure your tools are clean, you're making sure your lids have a good seal, there's no deterioration on the adhesive. Again, this is all about science. Canning is not an opportunity for creativity. Add your spices, add your creative flair, your personal touches later in the kitchen when you're actually cooking your recipes. If you have questions, Elaine, do you want me to answer any now? Do you still need time for your pizza rolls to cook? Or would you prefer that I answer them at the end of the class.
Hi, they're
Hi.
still in, but if people have got questions, please feel free. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, let's answer a few questions.
Angela, I've got a few here that people have asked. The first one being, if you're using a crock pot overnight, do you leave the lid off to allow for more evaporation?
That's a good question. So if you're leaving it on low, 8 or 9 hours is definitely sufficient to remove a lot of water. I've left the lid off before. It actually gets a little bit too thick, a little too dry, just because it is cooking for so long. But you could find a recipe and use that product, that thickened tomato paste, for tomato paste. That is actually the next step after sauce, is removing even more water content.
Great. So the next question is, can canning jars be sterilized in a hot oven?
So there are some different thoughts about that. I have done it so long as I've washed with soap and water first. Because again, if you're just taking jars out of the cupboard, we might suspect that they are clean, they look clean, but speaking from experience, there's always going to be a little bit of dust and debris that gets on there. So the best thing to do is at least rinse them. If you are going to put them in the oven and use that as your sterilization method, I think you need to look up the correct temperature and time frame. I don't know that off the top of my head, and I don't want to tell you something and just make something up and then steer you in the wrong direction. So do make sure to look up where you can find a legitimate recipe, something that's to be trusted, how long you would need to sterilize those in the oven for, and at what temperature. But regardless, make sure that you wash with soap and water first.
Great. Okay, so the last question here is about using the lids right out of the box. Do you not need to sterilize them, or do you want to sterilize those first before using those?
Nope, you would not want to sterilize your lid right out of the box, because any boiling, anything that you might use, even with soap and water and just washing with your hands, that's going to begin to deteriorate this adhesive that's on the outside. So this is something where I guess you could rinse it very quickly, like this if you wanted to. But really, this is something that can very safely just go right on top of the jar, and we'll sterilize it such a small piece, as it's in the water bath processing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Okay, I think that's all that we have for canning questions. But yes, feel free to ask in the chat and we'll make note of those for Angela afterwards.
Okay. I think it's all you, Elaine.
Right. Well, I've still got 5 minutes of my pizza things being in the oven. Excuse me. Let me just stay glamorous here. That was fascinating. I made some notes on some things because I've never tried canning, and it's something that I've seen, and it is the kind of thing that appeals to me greatly. But I've seen like all the products available, and I didn't understand the thing about being able to buy only lids. I would never have known about that. But I do know the thing about lids popping. So when you buy stuff from the store and you open it and the lid needs to pop. So that makes a lot more sense to me now. But the thing that I thought was really interesting was the bottled lemon juice.
Yes.
So that you can manage what the acidity level is and the flavor level is.
Exactly. It is interesting, especially as someone who really prefers to use homegrown, fresh ingredients as much as possible. It may sound silly, but that was a bit of a mental hurdle for me to get around, that I needed to buy lemon juice in a plastic jar in order to safely can something, There are other means you can get things such as powdered citric acid. Again, that's not a method that I've done. So if that interests someone over using a bottled lemon juice, find a recipe for that. But yeah, you would want to get the bottles, because then you have a guaranteed acidity level.
And also with the flavor element, I know if I've made hummus and I've used fresh lemons as opposed to bottled lemon juice, you really have to change the amount that's going into the mix, because the flavour difference is massive. The flavour tends to be stronger in the bottled one.
It's true.
Yeah, so it was not something that had occurred to me, but also the fact that you don't put the flavourings in until later.
Yeah, it's interesting. I definitely, so I went to this sauce canning party, and it was amazing, where a bunch of family members just got together and canned sauce, and the individuals from Long Island, so they may even be joining me right now. And the sauce is beautiful and it's wonderful, and it's this whole Italian family gathering. But my friend's jars exploded, which tells you that at some point along the way, bacteria got in. And so even though the family had for generations not used lemon juice or any sort of acid added to their jar, clearly bacteria was getting in somewhere along the way. And that's not to say somebody did something wrong. It's just to say that if we want to guarantee the shelf-stable product, we have to make sure that our pH levels are right.
There's something actually on my last podcast episode, the lady, when I always ask people, my guests, what their top tips are, and the lady that they had on was a scientist, and she was, one of her tips was about when you get mold, say like on the top of your sauce.
Yeah.
Now I know, I've done it in the past, you open your tomato puree, there's some mold on the top, I've scraped it off and used what's underneath. And she was explaining that if you've got mold on the top, it's come all the way through, bacteria's come all the way through to be on the top.
Mm.
Yeah, and I hadn't realised actually by the time it's hit the top, it's all the way through the sauce. So actually, if you've got mold on the top, it's time to get rid of the whole thing.
That's interesting. And so were you talking about that with regard to starter?
No. This was because it's on my podcast. It's all different. It's any food, and she was talking about it as just if you had jars of food, and you had jars that had got mold on the top, that don't just use what's underneath. That was her view. You know, that was what she tended to believe, and so she wouldn't use what was underneath it.
You know, it's funny because I think that canning is one of those things that has been around for decades, if not a century now. And people had to rely on this as a method to create shelf-stable canned goods, whether they were making it for their home or making them to sell a market of some type, right?
Yeah.
And so it is something that's been around for a long time. It's been time tested and it's been proven. But yet nowadays, it seems like if you don't have all the marketed proper tools, you won't be able to do it successfully. It's something that's dubbed as incredibly hard and confusing. But really, this is just one of the most well-used ways for people to preserve their food.
But isn't that the same with sourdough? Something that's been around for so long. Yeah. Why does it need to be overcomplicated? If people have made it, you know, in the sunshine and on their fires, why does it need to be complicated?
Right.
So take it back to the basics and bring some enjoyment into it would be my view.
Right.
I'm thinking, okay. So here we have sizzling away. These are my pizza rolls that were the first ones that went in. So these are the ones that are just with the cheese with the tomato sauce. And, oh, look at that. So these are the other ones. So these are the ones that have got the jalapeno and bits of chorizo in. I have to say they do smell amazing. And what I took out of the oven earlier, this is the one that I did in the pan. Let me see if I can tip that so you can not throw it on the floor. So this is the snug rolls that I baked in the pan with the lid on that have got the chocolate, date and walnuts in. So you could have done these in the same way. So when these come out, and they're coming out of your muffin tin, and they should just pull out, no sticking, no problem. If you get them out and you feel like they might need a bit more doing, you could always put them on a rack like this and put it back in the oven sitting on a tray if you felt like you wanted to just cook the bases a little bit more. So sometimes if they've been in a muffin tin like this and therefore they're a bit snug, you might feel that you want a bit more doing on the bases. That's the best way to do it. Put it on a rack on top of an oven tray, and then you can get some air going round the base and underneath. But those are my stuffed pizza rolls, which would be even better with Angela's tomato sauce. So I think you need to send me some.
Okay, I'll send you some. I will.
I think that's you know, you've said it publicly now. I have to say, Angela is the person that converted me onto honey, because I was never the biggest honey fan, and Angela sent me some of the honey from her homestead. Oh my gosh, it was amazing. So you've absolutely converted me onto the honey.
Did I really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, I didn't want to tell you that. You made all that effort to send it to me. But yeah, absolutely. It was just the flavour of it, because there was such a mildness to it. But it was the flavour from your home, you know, which I just thought was just amazing. So I absolutely loved it. So yes, it's the only pot of honey I've ever finished completely.
So I need to send you some tomato sauce, some honey, and
Yeah.
Are we going to be planting garlic this season? Do you need more seed garlic?
My darling Angela sent me some seed garlic for me to have a go with planting. And I did, and it did work initially, and then it didn't. And I'm not the best gardener yet. I'm still learning with that one, so I probably need to have another go.
All right, so we'll send seed garlic. We'll give you a nice little homestead care package, right?
Absolutely, yeah, I'm totally up for that. And what people will see, we're going to send out to you details of some follow-up classes that we're going to do. And one of them is going to include garlic. I'm a big garlic fan, but also when I see Angela's homegrown garlic and the video you put up the other day with braiding garlic, I mean, that just looked amazing. So to have your own must just be stunning.
Pretty rewarding, and it's pretty easy, Elaine. We just need to figure out how to have you put it in the ground, leave it alone, and then next spring it's going to come back and it's going to be beautiful. You'll have some nice greens coming out of your garden, your backyard, and then you'll be able to use it in all of your homemade recipes next summer.
But, you know, this is like me saying to people sourdough is easy, and they don't believe you until they actually do it. So yeah. I will. So okay. Whilst we're still here, and I'm starting to look at that. Look at them. Before I start putting something too hot in my mouth, do we have some questions, Keanu? Is there anything that we can answer whilst we're still here?
Yes. We have one question about what are the sweet fillings that you mentioned earlier? In
this one,
mm-hmm.
That was just what was in my cupboard. So it's just chocolate, walnut, and dates. Now, weirdly, I went to the gym the other day and came home with a bag of dates because the new manager there was cleaning out the stock cupboard, and he found all of these bags of dates that had been bought for Ramadan, so that when people were coming in to work out and breaking their fast, they had some dates to eat. And they weren't going to still be in date by the time they came around to Ramadan again. So we went into our spin class, and at the end of the class, he was saying, would anyone like a bag of dates? Random, but true. So that's what's in that one. There's something else you could have done with it, which probably might have been better. So in one of my recipes, I use date paste. Actually, if I'd soaked them and turned it into a puree, it would have given it a bit of moisture, which might have been a better idea. But I still think they probably taste quite nice. Can we answer any questions for anyone else, or are you happy to receive written email versions?
I actually have a link about your pizza rolls.
Yeah.
So sometimes in my tomato sauce, I like to use minced fresh garlic. So at the phase where I have the dough is rolled out, I put my sauce on, I would put on some minced garlic, but I know you've told me that sometimes minced garlic doesn't do well in a sourdough. Is that right?
Yeah, but only if you're putting it at the beginning. But I remember you disproved me on that. So typically, if you put raw garlic in your dough when you're making it from the beginning, it will slow down the proving. It will make the proving really slow. It can even halt it sometimes. So I would always recommend that people use roasted garlic or dried garlic or garlic granules or something. But I seem to recall that you made a loaf, didn't you? You put raw garlic in your dough right from the beginning and you had no problem with proving it. Am I remember right?
Yeah, that's true. I forgot about that. That's true. I did do that.
I
So
think it's got bionic garlic.
okay.
The fact that you managed to do it, because most people, the garlic would have slowed it down, but you didn't have that problem, did you?
I don't think that it didn't slow it down. I just remember that it still proved okay.
Well, in which case then, it may be just a case of giving it the time to do it, because I'm sure it must have tasted amazing. But if you were doing it with your pizza rolls like this, and you were stretching it out, putting the sauce, putting the garlic, then it's not going to make any difference to it at that point. So that would be fine.
Okay.
Honestly.
Okay, we have one more question for you, Elaine. Are there any flour combinations that will affect the rise or baking time for the pizza?
For the pizza rolls, no. As long as your flour, as long as your dough is strong enough. So, you know, if you were going to try and make a whole rye dough or something like that, it's all going to be a bit sticky and a bit hard work. But no, I've done this kind of thing with any kind of dough, any kind of flour in it. I've just rolled it out and filled it and done whatever, and it's fine. It can be sometimes one of those things that you do with some dough that's left over or something that you've forgotten to use. Can I just say, look at that, where it's got the, I don't know if you can see it, where it's had the cheese and the oil from the chorizo on the bottom. It's sort of, whoa. It almost makes me want to eat that, but I'm not going to. But no, you can use pretty much whatever flour combination you like. They will all work.
Sorry,
So if
we're wondering, what did you use to line the pan again for your pizza rolls?
For my pizza rolls, there's no lining in these. I didn't do anything to them. For the other one, if you're doing snug rolls, that one had just got parchment paper in the bottom.
Did you use any oil or butter on that though?
No, I didn't use any, because if you think about it, there's oil coming out of them from the cheese, and that tends to be what helps with it being non-stick.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. We are going to pull things to a close. If you do have more questions, please do send them. Anything you want to know about what Angela does, honestly, you've got to look at her produce. You've got to look at everything she produces. You need to follow her on Instagram just so that you can see her beautiful horses and her amazing dogs, amazing farm dogs, which I had not heard of that one either. And just look out for, we'll be sending you an email with things we're doing in the future. So if you fancy anything to do with garlic, more sourdough, you're going to love it. If you fancy learning how to make pumpkin loaves later in the year, oh yes, stringing up, making pumpkin shaped loaves, we are on it. So look in your inbox. We've got special details coming out to you. So please do let us know if you want to join us. And of course, tell everybody, tell all your friends that we are making a brilliant partnership here and that we are fabulous presenters.
We
Yeah, no,
appreciate each and every one of you spending part of your Saturday with us. Thank you so much for your time.
To those of you that are in the morning, I hope you have a fabulous rest of the day. To those of us here in the UK, enjoy your evening and get stuck into your pizza rolls, and thank you for joining us.
All right, bye.
Bye.